Hi, I'm Tristan, and this is Thinking About Politics. Well, today we are 1 year out from January 6, 2021, when the defeated former president's supporters attacked the United States of America. About 2,500 Trump supporters were driven to the Capitol by the former president and those in his political orbit. Their aim was to overthrow United States democracy for good and all. And I'll tell you, probably the most troubling aspect of this whole thing 1 year later is the muted response from most of my fellow Americans. Part of it is we are just truly stunned by the acts of violence committed by our fellow citizens against our country. It's right and proper, maybe. Most of us don't know what to make of it. Except for Fox News, which is plowing ahead with a complete disinformation campaign. But aside from them and other anti-American media outlets out there, most other media has seemed sort of unsure what to call this thing. But as the January 6th committee in Congress uncovers more and more damning evidence about the planning of this attempted coup by the defeated former president and his allies, maybe there's more of a willingness to call a spade on this one. The 1/6 anniversary saw a plethora of content about the event. PBS had a wonderful multi-hour special. Even CNN had some interesting coverage, and I generally try to stay away from cable news. And then there was this one, from the longest-running show in television, Meet the Press. Look, I end up watching Meet the Press a lot. It has its ups and downs, but I really got hooked when I was younger, and the legendary Tim Russert was the host. Now, there was a man who was pretty good at cutting through spin and not getting taken by partisan actors. He was neutral and nonpartisan in manner. Of course, he's passed away, but now it's hosted by Chuck Todd. He does a fine job. But this last year, I've always found his 1/6 coverage sort of lacking. He always seemed a little bit afraid to call it exactly what it was. Not that he's gotten anything like out and out wrong. He hasn't. But it's just like many other journalists, he sees an ethical obligation to stay out of the political fray at all costs. And under the rules of the latter half of the 20th century, that made sense when there was broad consensus that free speech and free press were a good thing. That was probably a good approach to take. But when you're confronting out-and-out fascists in your country, a legitimate fascist movement, there's no out of the political fray. There's no getting out of the way of this thing, especially if you're in journalism. Fascists will use the democratic order and free press to eliminate the democratic order and free press. Finally, in the episode of Meet the Press that aired on January 2nd, 2022, Chucky Todd and Meet the Press came correct. If you haven't seen this episode yet, I want you to go watch it. It's linked down in the description below. Chuck Todd lays down the most brutal demonstration of the former president's guilt you ever did see. His ill intent and corruption dripping from every detail, from before the 2020 election all the way up to January 6, 2021. And it is so damning when you list all of these facts out one after another on a timeline. I mean, you got right-wing conspiracy ding-dongs that think they're good at, connecting the dots. Let's see if they can connect these ones. A guy who always said any election he lost was fraudulent, lost an election and called it fraudulent. This isn't like the most difficult analysis in the world, is it? So it is just beautiful. I'm not even going to try to do it justice. Go and watch, the first 15 minutes of this episode for that alone. But then more to our point. Later in the show, Chuck Todd brings out Andrea Hill. Hey, this is editing Tristan here. The side effect of being dumb is I've gotten Fiona Hill's name wrong. I'm going to keep calling her Andrea Hill because, again, I'm dumb. But just know that her name is actually Fiona Hill. Moving on. You might remember Andrea Hill from the first Trump impeachment trial. She was a top Trump advisor on Russia. She's a national security expert. She now works for the Brookings Institute. But whether or not you agree with her politics, this is someone who is an international relations professional who knows what it looks like when democracies teeter and knows what to look for before they fall. And her and I share a big concern.
From the point of view of historians, I think people will look back at this whole period that we're describing here and see that this was a major tipping point in United States politics. And when you look at other countries that have gone into civil war, all kinds of civil crisis and political crisis, you see the same hallmark. And you also see a lot of people standing around basically saying, look, that couldn't possibly happen here. Yeah. And that's the problem that we face right now, a year on, is that some people still cannot grasp the peril that we're in and the risk that we have to our democracy looking forward.
Americans are not alert to the threat confronting them. And too many are still saying to themselves, it can't happen here. And as Miss Hill says, that is one of the necessary ingredients to toppling a stable democracy. Remember that Wendell Phillips quote we opened with about vigilance and liberty? Well, we didn't include that just to be pretentious here. We actually mean it. Periodic vigilance isn't enough. Periodic vigilance is how you get people like Republican Congressman Peter Mayer. He represents the Grand Rapids area in Michigan. Chuck Todd had him on after Hill and asked him a few questions. See, he's unique because he's one of the few Republicans who actually voted for the impeachment of Donald Trump after January 6th. But even he seems to be able to get on board with the Republican Party made in the image of Donald Trump because he's just so afraid of the Democrats' policy goals. And by the way, I'm about to play some clips. These are just like limited clips taken out of context. You shouldn't form an opinion on Congressman Mayer based on this. Watch the whole episode, learn more, but this is just to highlight our point here about this attitude we're talking about.
But do you accept what you heard in the last panel there, particularly from Fiona Hill, that this is not a political argument? You got one party that's being led by Trump here that seems to be trying to delegitimize our democracy. Does that concern you? Do you share that fear and view?
I do, but I also see another party that's trying to delegitimize our democracy in far less dramatic ways, calling for packing the Supreme Court, calling for abolishing the Senate.
Abolish the Senate, he says. At very best, that's hyperbolic, I guess. At worst, it's a lie. But do you hear what this congressman is telling you? See, because AOC and the Progressive Caucus of the Democrats are so scary to people like Congressman Mayer, because these lefties want to use democracy to enact programs that are way more popular than anything the Republicans are proposing, this congressman seems kind of wishy-washy on treason now. See, Trump's anti-democracy. AOC and the Democrats, they're not anti-democracy, but if they can use democracy to get things that Congressman Mayer just thinks are bad, he's not really all that tied to democracy. Doesn't take much to get the man down with treason, does it? Your true colors are showing, Congressman. Exhibit B in irresponsible whataboutism is Jonah Goldberg, former editor of the National Review, a conservative publication. Again, here's just a clip.
The failure of Republican elites is pretty freaking obvious at this point. But, the better example of how the Democrats have been partisan in all of this is look how the impeachment was handled. An institution that took itself seriously would have impeached Donald Trump within 48 hours of January 6th, or impeached and removed.
Okay, does anyone buy this? Does anyone think that the problem with the Jan 6th impeachment was that Democrats moved too slow? I do, but does anybody think that moving faster would have gotten Republicans on board somehow? No. If Republicans aren't going to impeach a month after Jan 6th, they're not going to impeach 2 days after Jan 6th. And that's because, and this is key now, they don't think it's wrong when their supporters sack Washington. They don't think it's wrong when their supporters get violent. I mean, this guy acknowledges that Republican elites have failed and still thinks that those GOP elites would have gotten on board if the Democrats had moved impeachment through quicker? Where do you live, Mr. Goldberg? And just to recap that series of nonsense noises you just made that, to be nice, we will call an argument. Donald Trump is a threat to democracy, but Democrats did not move fast enough to remove Donald Trump, a threat to democracy. Therefore, GOP supporters have no choice but support the GOP that is enabling Donald Trump and being remade in his image. Like, are you okay?
The way the Democrats has handled a lot of the Trump stuff has been for partisan advantage.
Valid rebuttal. I think you actually do have a point there, that Democrats from time to time look like they're trying to score points on some of this stuff. Look at things like the first impeachment trial. I think the political calendar played way too large of a role in how the Democrats proceeded forward with that one. But for the second impeachment, part of the reason it took so long is that Republicans slow-walked that second one. Like, in my perspective, the issue was the intransigence of the GOP, not Democrats' failure to prosecute here. But, hey, look, I get it, man. You're a Republican. You can't stand to see Dems scoring political points up and down off of January 6th. I get it that you're concerned you could help Democrats and hurt your own policy objectives if you're too critical of Donald Trump. I get that. Do you get that you're not taking a principled stand, though? Do you get that you are not standing on principle for this country or its form of government? Do you get where I'm coming from when I say that? Like, I don't love Joe Biden, but there's no way he's been so flagrantly offensive that he's like pushing you into the arms of Donald Trump. That's just no way. That doesn't make sense. We need to get serious and view this anti-American movement for the threat that it is. Here's a hard and fast polling factoid. Right now, as recording this video, a lot of Americans see democracy as under threat. But most of the people who see it as under threat are right-wingers actively threatening that democracy. People who have been deluded by the lies of politicians about fake voter fraud and, the fear of immigrants. The types of people who have conflated the words freedom and democracy with being white and Christian. There are just too many good, decent, honest, smart people walking around right now who grew up in safe places telling themselves it can't happen here. Unless those people start waking up right now, we could be in for a real bad time. And I get how that might not sound like it, but that's actually a good thing. Because it means the people still have the power. It means that we can do something by talking up the importance of democracy and the rule of law. We can do something by being a model of good behavior, by keeping an open mind to new ideas, but also not getting pulled along by whatever new fad comes into fashion. We can talk to our local leaders about democracy and see where they stand on protecting the will of the people. We can meet our neighbors. We can reach out into our community and make contact and build networks and strengthen that community that is the biggest bulwark against dictatorship there is. Probably like the best thing we can do to combat ethno-nationalism right now is to build strong, inclusive, and vibrant communities with one another. Make no mistake, we are under threat. We should act like it. Does not mean panic. Gotta act with deliberation. And we got to do those things necessary to strengthen our communities and to strengthen our democracy. We've always got to be vigilant. We can't afford to take our eye off the ball. Well, that's it for me. You've been great. I hope to see you again next time. Until then, keep cool. I ain't got time to kiss you now. I'm busy with this mule.